Hello, friends, and welcome to the Messed Up to Set Up podcast. I am comedian Michael Halcomb, and today I have the awesome, great privilege of talking with fellow Hawaii comedian Kanoa Morse. Kanoa, man, it is good to have you on. Really looking forward to this.
Everything seems so messed up, but it's just not set up.
Yeah, so we're gonna jump into we're gonna do a couple episodes with Kanoa, and in this first one, we're just gonna hear about his journey into comedy, the who, what, when, where, why, how, all that kind of stuff. We'll probably do a few tangents, but really looking forward to this. So right out of the gate, if you would, you can pause the show right now if you want, and head over to Instagram and give Noah a follow on there. This is his IG. It's just Kanoa Morse, and yeah. Check that out, give him a follow, and you'll be in touch with some more local Hawaii comedy. And if you want to follow me, check out Michael Halcomb live on there. But Kanoa, man, good to have you on the show, and looking forward to hearing about this. So let's start. When did you get into comedy?
I got into comedy like April of like 2022, 2023, April 2023. It was around my birthday. Like when you've been married for a long time and you forget that you don't have any hobbies.
Okay,
And then
yeah.
you're like, I should get one of those ships and bottles or whatever. I've always loved stand-up comedy. I've always considered myself someone that's like humorous. And I've been a fan of stand-up comedy since I was like 8, which is a weird thing for an 8-year-old to be into. Just talking to my classmates, they're talking about the new episode of Dragon Ball Z. And I'm like, did you see Mike Birbiglia's special? And they're like, who? So having always been into stand-up comedy, I went down to Stand Up Honolulu, run by Pepper Lamb and Christine, and I did my first open mic. And not everyone does well on their first open mic. I'm not saying I killed it, but I was like, I got some laughs. And so, it's a drug in that aspect. And you're like, well, I have to go back now. And it's just stuck since then.
Right on. So, I thought you'd been in it a little longer. So you started you said April 2023. So that's like just a year before me. So I started April 2024. That was my first time performing. And so I'm coming right up on a year. You're coming right up on 2 years.
I'm going to go ahead and go on my Instagram because I think I posted the night I did stand up for the first time, and I'll just go ahead and fact check myself there. No, yeah, April 2023.
Right on. So you've been at it a couple years, and all right. So I want to talk about this because you mentioned like as a youngster, you were like into stand-up comedy. I can actually relate to that. I grew up watching David Letterman every night. Like that was a huge part of my childhood. Literally pretty much every night. Like, and he'd come on at 11 o'clock after the news every night or 11:30, and I'd stay up and watch him, right? Even as like all the way through school. It was just like a big thing. And then of course, Saturday Night Live was huge during my childhood. I feel like I got to see they grew up during the golden era of Saturday Night Live. But what initially got you into that? Did your parents watch stand-up comedy or?
No, in elementary school and still now, I had a giant head. And in school, that got me bullied a lot. And so I was like, going home to my parents, I was like, Mom, Dad, can I beat this guy up? And they're like, that's your cousin. You got to ask your uncle. I couldn't beat them up. So I had to figure out another way to like clap back when people would make fun of me for having a giant head. Even now, I'm taking up most of this square right now. So instead of like, physically engaging these kids that were like making fun of me, I was like, well, I'm just going to go learn how to be funnier than them. And so I would just go home and I would binge watch, Premium Blend, Insomniac, Pell's Show, Comedy Central Presents, whatever I could get my hands on. I would just watch all of it because I thought it was really fun. In addition to that, I've got ADHD and probably some other stuff going on there. And so for a lot of kids that have something going on that's like neurodivergent, a lot of the time, one of the coping mechanisms that they'll go to is like class clowning because they want to avoid being put on the spot and embarrassed when they're not paying attention or don't know something. So they'll just be like, haha, miss, I'm going to deflect this. You're fat. So sorry, go.
So like one of the things to know about you is that your full-time job at present is you're an educator, you're a teacher. And I mean that requires some sense of humor, usually, not always, but I mean to be good at it. I think it requires, a good sense of humor. Otherwise, like students you're going to be boring or they're not going to like you. And so tell us a little bit about that aspect of your life. And do do you bring comedy into that on the regular? I mean, just making jokes and humor and stuff like that, or not really?
I think it helps a lot with sitting in the pocket when you have like a bad audience on stage because there's no audience worse than a bunch of like kids going through puberty. Like they're jerks. So like
Yeah.
it's learn how to like sit in the pocket there and like get through what you want to get through. But it's been really, I don't know, because it's fun for me. I get to try out all my clean material on my kids if I'm transitioning between activities. I was like, here's one for you. Aha. Starting out doing stand up on the island, I was very blue. I'm still very blue. A lot of ribaldry. I don't know how to pronounce that, but you know, a lot of raunchy stuff is my bread and butter in my personal preferences, and so it's nice being at school, being able to just hash out all my clean stuff and be like, you know what, I could actually build a set off this. I'm comfortable with that.
Right. So why, let me ask, why the lean toward blue comedy? Like just,
So there's this thing in history called jester's privilege,
okay.
which was court jesters. If anyone criticized a king during like the feudal eras throughout history,
Right.
they were pretty much executed. But like the jester had the special privilege to like kind of toe the line a little bit more than everyone else because they
Right.
had like that creative license, like that, you know, privilege to say things about the king because it's like, haha, nah, it's just a joke. And I feel like a lot of the blue things that we talk about, you know, like sex, politics, religion, like those are typically taboo in everyday society. And so I feel almost like a responsibility or like a draw to talk about those kinds of topics because it's like, where else are we going to discuss this kind of thing?
Yeah, I get that. I think it's certainly like as a clean comedian, right? Like, and I guess that we could even talk about that. What is clean? Because like really the line is different, I think, for everybody. I mean, what I consider clean, may not be, clean for the lady, the old purple haired lady who sits in a church pew or, whatever. Like it's the line's very movable. I think it's also like with the too soon, right? Too soon. Well, that's different for everybody. Like I'm the kind of person that if something crazy happens, I'm ready to joke about it immediately. I don't know if that's healthy or unhealthy, but there's never really a too soon for me, I think. But yeah.
And I feel like that's why, you know, stand-up comedy is some kind of indicator for something in the DSM-5, you know? Because it's like, oh, really stressful situation I'm going through right now. How do I make this funny? Because it's a
Yeah,
coping mechanism, you know? It's
it is.
what it was for me in school. It's what it continues to be.
It totally is. That's like my sort of one of my mottos, right? Is if it's messed up, it's material. Like, and I'm always sort of, I'm not, I mean, I'm on the lookout, but I'm not like just constantly looking out for jokes. But man, I find that with that filter or with that lens, with that philosophy, like it's just so much easier to see the funny in everything. And my other motto, laughter is greater than outrage, right? Like I'm really trying to like lean hard into that these days. But
I'm out
yeah,
of work right now, and that's because my wife woke up, and so I'm being a gentleman. She's indecent. I'm gonna block it with my massive head.
okay. That's funny. All right, so you got into you're like on high alert over there. You got up into stand up just a couple years. You grew up watching these comedians, and I guess I'm curious, what has the stand up comedy journey been like so far for you?
There's a bunch of hobbies that you get into where you're like, you have that moment like that where the hook sets, you know what I mean? You're like, I gotta do this forever now. And then immediately after that, you'll bomb or do terrible. And there are so many hobbies like that. Like I'm starting to golf now. Me and my roommate, we golf a lot. And sometimes it'll just stick. It's like, oh my God, I'm hitting this driver so good. It's so straight. I'm not hooking it. I'm not slicing it. This is amazing. And then the next day you're like, do I even know what I'm doing? What the? And so
Right.
comedy's the same thing. You just
Yeah.
bomb like 3 or 4 nights, you know, in a month and you're like, it's over. I don't know what funny is anymore. And yeah,
So how, because different comedians, I think, deal with it differently. Like for me, the idea of bombing, like I've been doing public speaking for over 20 years, but this idea of bombing is what kept me away from the mic for a really long time. Like, so I just always kept stand up on my bucket list. Like it's a bucket list thing I want to do. And then finally I went to Stand Up Honolulu. That's where I did my first performance as well. It was during one of those showcases and, a 7-minute set. And that was my first time doing it. And like you, like I got some laughs. So I gotta keep trying this. But how do you get maybe through, maybe not over, but like through this like tension or fear of bombing? How do you do that personally?
I feel like if, you know, John Florence or Andy Irons goes out to surf and the waves are just absolutely trash, they're just sloppy or it's like mad flat, they don't blame themselves for being a bad surfer because it's a two-person tango, right? So it's like, there are going to be some days as a comic that you don't get on stage in the best mindset or you don't give your best effort or your material just happens to suck that day. That's fine. You're still a good surfer at the end of the day. It's one of those things where you're super allowed to just feel imposter syndrome that doesn't happen in like some other hobbies. Sometimes it's just not in the cards and that's fine. That's part of it, bombing. So what I do is I just develop I'm sorry, I was about to tell a blue joke. Okay, I think it's clean. You just develop a shame kink and then that way you kill it on stage and then that's amazing. Or you totally embarrass yourself and that's amazing.
So I was on a playbill with you and a couple others a few weeks ago, and this was interesting to me to have your parents in the audience.
Oh yeah.
You were telling very blue joke during that time. Does that feel awkward to you or no?
It's kind of where I learned how to as a person. I can look my mom dead in the face and tell these jokes because I'm like, I've heard way worse come out of her mouth.
Wow, all right.
I'm the bastard child of a carpenter and a stripper. It's not like there's a whole bunch that can like
Okay. The child
turn
of
them pale in the face.
Man, okay. So that's interesting. Yeah. All right. So you get through the bombing. Just have you ever just like bombed and you're like, I don't want to do comedy for a while now. I just want to be done. I need a breather. I'm taking a break.
Like it's good that I do stand up because I'd rather not be a gambler because if I was gambling it would be terrible, but like if I bomb in stand up I just I'm like turn a little adamant now. I'm like, no, I gotta go right back and just prove it. I'm like, nah, this premise works, I promise. And then you go right back in there and you're just really stubborn and you just keep banging your head against the wall. And so I'm really glad I'm not a gambler because I'd be broke.
Yeah.
But
Well, I've noticed, there's a huge difference between being like on a set list or a performance list for like an actual comedy show than like a stand-up mic, like or an open mic, right? Of course we've been at a number of the same open mics, and people a lot of times are showing up at a restaurant or somewhere to eat and then they get stand-up comedy dropped on them. They're not even expecting it, right? Like, they certainly didn't come to laugh. They maybe came for a good night, and then here we are interrupting them, and they're annoyed, or it's just a bunch of comedians where they're thinking about their jokes. So a lot of times at those open mics, you won't get any laughs. Or any traction.
there's gonna be nights where like it's just you and other comics and the other comics are interested in what they're going to say and anyone else that might be there is actually there to just patronize the business. And so if you don't get feedback, that's fine. Something you can practice though on nights where like it's just a cruddy crowd is you can just go out there and try to hone not even just your material, just kind of like your oratory and your gravitas. Because if you can get people interested in what you're saying where it wasn't their purpose to come out and see you, that's a good indicator of like the public speaking skills that'll benefit you. Cross-disciplinary from like, stand-up comedy, public speaking, whatever. And so, you got to look at those nights not as like, I can't get feedback. It's like, well, I got to practice being mad interesting now.
I think it's like such a fascinating art form, stand-up comedy.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear that one.
I was saying, I think it's such an interesting art form, right? Yeah, every comedian's different. Every crowd is going to be different every single time. Even if it were the same people who showed up to the same mic a week later, they're going to be a different crowd because they're dealing with different things that day. Different things have happened in the world since a week ago, and so that variable of different audience every time is just wild to me. Like that to me is the wildest thing about stand-up comedy.
And that's kind of our job, right? Like I love joking. The show that I just did in KawaiiCon, it's great because I'm a nerd and so I can use the nerd material that usually is too niche and then have everyone there at least at a basic level of understanding. But I feel like that's the challenge, right? Even if you have a specific understanding or set of experiences, you have to use that comic brain to find, those unexamined human universal truths. And if you can do that, you can make anyone laugh about something, even if it's like mad niche, as long as you can like, preface it and be like, I know that you're not familiar with Naruto, but let me tell you about how it's an allegory for, and then, you know,
Mm.
that's a terrible example, but
Well, like even just, I'm learning here, like each venue has a completely different aura, a different vibe, a different feel, right? We have Anna O'Brien's, which is like grungy, gritty, rock and roll, college kind of audience versus, Hawaiian Brian's or, wherever else, like Lokahi, like each venue is like so different and draws a different type of audience generally too.
and you know, I feel like that's still true even for people that are like mad professional with this, because there's, you know, there's bar comics, there's theater comics, there's arena comics, there's,
Right.
you know, and they all kind of have different vibes, different tempos, different material. And don't get me wrong, like all of those comics can perform at all of those other venues, right? But I guess their style, their subject matter, their rhetorical style lends themselves to certain venues over others.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even thinking about like there's I've only heard rumors of this. I've never like actually like seen it, but like there's a Christian comedy circuit or a church comedy circuit that I've heard a lot about this. I don't know that it really exists or how to get into it or whatever, but like dude stuff is definitely gonna go well or not well there. That, couldn't work or work somewhere else. Like that's not there. Yeah.
I would do comedy inside of a church, but I'm afraid of catching up fire. I'm a man of faith. I would just say the wrong thing and then instantly get covenanted.
I heard like I've read rather and seen some videos like Taylor Tomlinson talking, and she told a semi blue joke, I guess it was, and that got her booted out of this church circuit or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So I mean, again, dude, the line of what's appropriate, inappropriate, clean, not clean, like too soon, like that kind of stuff. It's so blurry, like, and different for each person. Yeah, I don't know. I find it fascinating. So let me ask you this, dude. Why? I mean, you told me like, you were bullied in school and that was a way to deal with some of the stuff, but why are you doing comedy now? Like, I mean, you've been out of school for years and then you've only been doing this a couple of years. So why be doing it now? Is it coping? Is that the thing? Like what's the
Sorry, I
draw?
missed that last question. Is it
Is it coping? Like what's the thing? What's the draw for you to be doing comedy now?
I feel like 99% of everyone's daily activities is coping. Depends on your philosophical framework of it. It's like, why do you eat this food over this food? It's like, because it tastes good. Why do you eat food that tastes good? Because it makes me happy. It's like, why do you want to be happy? It's like, because it makes me temporarily forget that I am going to die one day. And that's why I like to do comedy, is because I like to laugh. I like to make people laugh. If I can make something that can sometimes be bleak enjoyable, then that's kind of a great thing to do. It's a service. I don't know.
Who are you watching or listening to these days as far as other comedians go?
One of my comics that I'm like really into recently is Dan Soder. I like him a lot. He does a really good job of just taking unexamined commonalities that we've all noticed and then just like he told a joke about like, I love my dog so much. I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna scream into his neck fat. Like,
That's great.
talk to your dog like an idiot. If you go home and talk to your dog like a normal person, you're a psychopath. Like that's super relatable. I don't know.
All right. Interesting. That's a great joke. Great line. Scream into its neck fat. So you're performing. You just did a show this past weekend. You mentioned Hawaii Con. Say a little bit about that.
I'm sorry, did you?
Yeah. So you did a show this past weekend called Hawaii Con. What was that all about?
So Kawaii-Con is a Japanese anime slash Comic-Con adjacent convention for nerd culture, people that watch anime, manga, play video games, participate in any kind of dorky hobby, furries. I'll let you explain that to your audience in the footnotes. And it's a 3-day convention at the Hawaii Convention Center, and local comic Jasmine Batista gathered up a bunch of local comics that are nerd inclined or nerd adjacent, and then we did a comedy show. And it was dope.
Yeah, good man. Glad to hear that. Glad to hear that went well. Are you doing? So there's a comedy competition that starts tomorrow. Are you in that or no?
Tomorrow, I'm in it. I'm gonna talk to your podcast viewers and make myself sound really important. I got to go to I have a podcast later today at 2, and then tomorrow before the tournament, I got a podcast at 10:30 before the tournament at 7. I'm kind of a busy guy. You know, if you want to book me, you should really, if you pay more, I'll maybe my schedule can open up.
Right on. Well, yeah, it's interesting, getting into the stand-up comedy scene here. I've found it very interesting. Have you found it? You seem to be pretty close with a lot of people. Have you found what parts of it have you found challenging?
I'm socially awkward, and so coming into a scene that's been around since long before I've been in it, just kind of learning how to gracefully navigate social situations. Like any hobby, there's going to be cliques or like affiliations, and then like alliances, and then you kind of just like you don't want to be walking around blind, just stubbing your toe on everything, and you're like, wait, oh, we're not cool with that. All right, well, cool. Well, I'm cool with them. Is that cool that I'm cool with them? Then it's like, no, it's not cool that you're cool with them. It's like, then I'm only a little cool with them. And they're like, okay. And, just learning how to like navigate the social situations has been a little bit difficult for me because I'm a socially awkward person.
All right. Yeah. I think that's challenging. I mean, not just with Chris, as you're pointing out with the comedy, but just in general in life, right? Learning how to navigate that. Yeah. I've heard horror stories of comedians, as they're coming up and, they all have their battle wounds and their war stories. And what has been, do you have a war story that you can share to maybe help us other aspiring comedians to just push through it and get over it and keep going?
No. I mean, nothing like even like noteworthy. There's just been like social missteps where you're like, oh, my bad, I didn't know. But I don't know. I think like the best way to go about involving yourself in the comedy scene, unless you're in like a mad cutthroat place where it's like Succession, like LA, don't go to LA. Like Hawaii is such a small scene that we don't have room for any of that kind of social feudalism or whatever. You just gotta just support everyone. I don't know, unless they're like an utter jerk,
So I find it interesting. I've like moved like in a couple different comedy spheres, but obviously most of my time has been here. I kind of just like, keep going regardless, like do my thing regardless. Have you heard of the let them theory? Are you familiar with this?
Let them. No.
Yeah. I find that helpful for comedy, but really just anything in life, right? Especially where you're putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. The let them theory is essentially like, say someone is talking crap. Well, let them talk crap, but let me ignore it and keep going. Like, someone is stealing material, right? Well, let them steal material. Let me keep doing my own thing. Let me keep being original. Essentially, like just let them do what they're doing. Like you can't control that. You can't change that. All you can control, right, is how you react or what you feel or what you do. And so let me do A, B, C, or D. I find like ordering like things, if I hit a challenge, like ordering it that way in my mind is pretty helpful. Like it's kind of just a nice little mental hack.
Because when is like addressing anyone that's been talking smack about you ever made the situation like better? You know what I mean? Or they're like, I see the error of my ways. This isn't a 27-minute Saturday morning cartoon where they're like, I'm sorry, I will do better. It doesn't happen. You can just let them go and then like, just let your character talent speak for itself.
Right.
Be fine.
Yeah. So you plan to keep going forward with comedy? Like, what do you have? Any hopes, any aspirations, any short-term, long-term goals?
I have my short-term and long-term goals. I'd like to get to the Blue Note at some point. That'd be dope. Either this year or the next. I'm not in a rush. Short-term, whooping you in the tournament. That'd be cool. No, just I bomb so often at Anna O'Brien's. Like, it's a great venue, just not for me. I have so many like bad sets at Anna's where I'm like, every time I go there, I'm like, it's back. The ghosts of jokes pass on me. And so I don't know if I can get over the jitters of just not being that great with a track record at Anna's. Hopefully I can do well. I don't know. If I win, dope. If I don't, I got to tell jokes in front of a packed crowd. It's hardly a lose situation. Long term, what do I want out of this? I love comedy altruistically. If I get something out of it, dope, amazing. If I don't get anything out of it, I'm doing something that fills my soul, and that's something I get out of it. So it's like, is it worth doing? Always for me.
I find one of the more challenging things for me, like being a parent, right, is like, dude, it's my kids are in sports. I got to pick them up at practices in the evenings. Like, dude, just the evening aspect of the comedy life is really hard. I find that to be like the most challenging thing. Giving up my my evening nights with my wife and my kids. Like that to me is the worst part of it, dude.
Bring them.
There's no way I could bring my
Kids,
wife,
we're going to the Irish bar. Come watch your daddy compete.
dude.
This is Belt Buckle. He's a crust punk. He'll be watching you.
My wife has been to a few of the shows, but yeah, there's no way I'd bring my kids. And that's funny. I've had, I used to pastor, so I had some of my church people come to the shows, and it's like, whoo, man.
Sorry, I'm listening to you right now. I missed it because of traffic.
But yeah, it's interesting, man. So, well, I appreciate you, sharing your journey into comedy and what's been like a couple years and that you've been doing it. And I want to tell people who are watching or listening to, again, follow you on @KanoaMorse. And yeah, man, thanks for doing this. We'll wrap up part 1 here. So if you're watching and listening, be sure to tune back in a few days or whenever and catch part 2 of this, where Kanoa's going to tell one of his jokes. We're going to kind of talk about the genesis, origin of the joke, and then we'll make up some jokes on the spot as well. But Kanoa, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming on. All right. So for those of you watching and listening, check out Kanoa on IG @KanoaMorse. After you've done that, you can follow me on there as well. Head over to michaelhalcomb.live, and we got daily blog posts on there. You can find the podcast there as well, and a bunch of other stuff. And I've just launched, just over the weekend, by the way, if you're watching or listening, I've just launched a joke writing group page on Facebook. It's called the Joke Writers Lab. And if you're watching or listening and you're interested in that, go follow us on there, Facebook/groups/the Joke Writers Lab. And we've already got 10 people at the time of recording this on there, which is pretty cool because it's only like 48 hours old. People are posting jokes on there, premises, asking other comedians, hey, how can I punch this up? Any ideas for tags? How could I polish this? How could I trim this? So it's been really fun already. You can bring your ideas and your jokes there and get feedback from comedians. So it's pretty cool. The Joke Writers Lab. So, all right, we're going to stop there and say we hope that helped.
It's all messed up, yeah. Everything's messed up. We're going from this mess up to the next setup. Everything seems so messed up, but it's just